She didn't notice the snow at first, not until it started sticking to her lashes and melting down her cheek like the world was quietly laughing at her. Chloe Harris sat on a frozen bench outside a glowing storefront, phone trembling in her hands, rereading her mother's text like it might magically rewrite itself the 10th time. Christmas dinner is Saturday. Your sister is bringing her fiancé. Your cousin is bringing someone new. Please don't come alone again. Everyone keeps asking about you. Her stomach dropped so hard it felt like it hit the sidewalk. 3 days. That's all she had before she walked into another room full of people who loved her, judged her, and somehow did both at the same time. Chloe's thumb hovered over the screen, then pressed it off like that could shut down the problem. She stared at the streetlights reflected in the wet pavement, the snow turning every sound softer, every breath visible. Great, she whispered. Then it came out louder than she meant. Where do you even find a boyfriend in 3 days? She laughed once, sharp and bitter, because the truth was uglier. She wasn't asking where to find love. She was asking where to find a shield. Something warm to stand beside her while her aunt's eyes scanned her for failures. Something to stop her dad from looking at her like she was still 12 and disappointing him. Something to keep her sister's smug smile from slicing through dinner like a knife. Her wallet felt like an insult when she opened it. A couple of wrinkled bills, loose coins, a receipt for instant noodles. She did the math like she was punishing herself. Rent, utilities, groceries, the train card. When she got to the end, there it was, the number that made her throat tighten. $5. I can literally afford $5 of dignity, she muttered. That's it. She shoved the wallet back into her bag and squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to cry out here like some sad movie scene. Then a voice behind her said, calmly, like it was the most normal thing in the world, for $5, I'll do it. Chloe jolted so hard her bag slipped off her shoulder. A man stood a few steps away, half under the awning, snow dusting his dark hair and the shoulders of his coat. Not a cheap coat either. He was tall, the kind of tall that made people unconsciously straighten, and his face had that clean, familiar symmetry that made Chloe's brain scramble for a memory she couldn't catch. His eyes weren't cold like the air. They were warm, amused, and there was something else in them too, like recognition. Excuse me, Chloe said, hugging her bag to her chest like it could protect her from whatever this was. He took a step closer, hands still in his pockets, polite distance, no sudden moves. You said you need a boyfriend for Christmas dinner, he said, and you said you have $5 left. I'm saying, I'll be your boyfriend. For $5. Chloe stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the camera crew, the prank reveal. None came. He just stood there, breath fogging, looking like he belonged in a different life than hers. That's insane, she managed. You don't even know me. He tilted his head slightly. True. A small smile touched his mouth. But you look like you're about to walk into a battlefield with no armor, and I'm free on Christmas. Call it seasonal goodwill. Chloe narrowed her eyes. Seasonal goodwill doesn't usually come in designer coats. His smile widened like he'd been waiting for that. It was a gift. She should have walked away. She knew she should. But the snow kept falling, the text kept burning in her pocket, and the humiliation of another lonely entrance kept tightening around her chest. I'm serious about the $5, she said, forcing her voice steady. That's all I can pay. No catching feelings. No weird stuff. You show up, you smile, you leave. The man's eyes flicked over her face for a second, and something in his expression softened. Deal, he said. We'll set rules. We'll build a story. And if you want me gone at any point, I'm gone. He pulled one hand from his pocket and offered it. I'm Ryan. Ryan Bennett. Chloe hesitated, then shook his hand. His palm was warm. Too warm. Like he'd been holding heat for her. Chloe, she said. Chloe Harris. His fingers tightened for the briefest moment, like her name meant more to him than it should, and for reasons she couldn't explain, her heart kicked hard against her ribs. Snow kept falling through the morning like the world had decided to stay quiet for a while, and Chloe realized she hadn't slept more than 3 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ryan standing under that streetlight again, offering something that felt too strange to be real. She had his number now. A fake boyfriend. A deal made for $5. It should have felt ridiculous. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something she didn't fully understand yet. Her phone buzzed again just as she stepped into the tiny cafe where she worked the morning shift, still rubbing warmth back into her hands. Don't panic, the new message read. But if we're going to convince your family we're real, we should probably meet before the big performance. Chloe exhaled slowly, setting her bag behind the counter. Right. This wasn't a dream. This was happening. She typed back while tying her apron. When? The response came almost instantly. Today. Late afternoon. Public place, so you don't think I'm a serial killer. She let out a small laugh despite herself. Good plan, she replied. Because that possibility is still on the table. The cafe stayed quiet through the early hours, the kind of slow winter morning where people moved carefully and spoke softly, like the cold had wrapped itself around their voices. Chloe wiped down the counter for the third time and tried not to replay every detail of yesterday. Ryan's calm tone, the way he looked at her like he already knew her, that part bothered her most. There had been recognition in his eyes, or maybe she imagined it because she wanted to believe someone could look at her like that without judgment. Her coworker Megan leaned over the espresso machine and studied her face. You look like you're about to either confess a crime or fall in love, she said bluntly. Chloe nearly dropped the mug. What? Megan shrugged. You're smiling at nothing. That's never a good sign. Chloe hesitated, then lowered her voice. I might have hired a fake boyfriend for Christmas dinner. Megan blinked slowly, processing. You what? Chloe explained everything in a rushed whisper, from the bench to the $5 to Ryan appearing like some winter ghost offering help. By the time she finished, Megan's mouth hung open. Okay, Megan said carefully. Either this is the start of a romantic comedy or a true crime documentary. Chloe groaned. I know. Megan leaned forward. Is he hot? Chloe hesitated just long enough to answer the question without words. Megan slapped the counter. Oh my God, you're doomed. By late afternoon, Chloe stood outside a bookstore cafe downtown, checking her phone every few seconds while pretending not to. Snow clung to the edges of the sidewalks, packed into soft gray piles, and the air had that clean, biting clarity that made everything feel sharper. She was 5 minutes early, then 3 minutes, then right on time. He's not coming, she thought suddenly, and her stomach dropped. Of course he's not. Why would a stranger follow through on something this ridiculous? She started to turn away when a familiar voice behind her said, If you run now, I still expect my $5. Chloe turned so fast her scarf nearly whipped off. Ryan stood there, hands tucked into a dark wool coat, looking like he had stepped out of a completely different world and into hers without effort. He was smiling, that same easy, warm expression that made her chest tighten in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. You're late, she said automatically, even though he wasn't. By 12 seconds, he replied, glancing at his watch. I apologize for my unforgivable behavior. She rolled her eyes but couldn't stop the small smile that slipped out. Inside, they took a quiet table by the window. For a moment, neither spoke. Chloe wrapped her hands around a cup of hot chocolate she hadn't realized she ordered, while Ryan stirred his coffee absent-mindedly, like he was thinking 3 steps ahead of the conversation. So, he said finally, leaning back slightly, tell me about the battlefield I'm walking into. Chloe let out a long breath. My family isn't horrible, she said. They're just intense. My sister is perfect. My cousin measures success and salary. My mom worries about everything. My dad asks questions that feel like job interviews. Ryan listened without interrupting, his attention steady in a way that made her feel oddly seen. And me showing up alone again will confirm everyone's favorite theory, she continued quietly. That I'm stuck. That I'm falling behind. That I'm failing. The last word came out softer than she intended. Ryan didn't respond immediately. He just watched her for a second like he was measuring something. Then we make sure they don't see that, he said calmly. We give them a version of the story that protects you. Chloe met his eyes. Why are you doing this? She asked again, unable to stop herself. He smiled slightly, but there was something careful behind it. Let's just say, he replied, I believe in second chances, even when someone doesn't realize they need one. They spent the next hour building a relationship that didn't exist. How they met, how long they'd been dating. Little details that would make the lie feel effortless. Ryan suggested practical things she hadn't even considered, like inside jokes and shared habits, small touches that would make their story believable. He was good at it. Too good. Sometimes when she looked at him, really looked, she felt that strange flicker again, like she had seen him somewhere before or almost remembered a face from another time. What? He asked once, catching her staring. Nothing, she said quickly. You just seem familiar. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in his expression. Then it was gone, replaced by that calm smile. Maybe I have one of those faces, he said lightly. But Chloe wasn't convinced. As they stood to leave, stepping back into the cold evening air, he held the door open for her without thinking, like it was second nature. Snow had started falling again, soft and steady. I'll pick you up Saturday, he said. 7 o'clock. Chloe nodded, heart beating faster than it should for a simple arrangement. Ryan? She said before he could turn away. Yeah. She hesitated. Thank you. Really. His gaze softened in a way that made her chest tighten. You're welcome, Chloe, he said quietly. Trust me, everything's going to go better than you think. The days leading up to Christmas moved in a blur of nerves and tiny rehearsals that felt more real than they should have. Snow lingered along rooftops and parked cars, no longer dramatic, just quietly present like a reminder that everything was fragile and cold beneath the surface. Chloe found herself checking her phone more than she checked the clock at work. Ryan would send short messages throughout the day. Casual, almost annoyingly calm. Remember, we met at a bookstore cafe. You spilled tea on my sleeve. Or, your dad likes football, right? Send me the team. Each message steadied her in ways she didn't expect. It wasn't just that he was committed to the story. It was that he seemed invested in protecting her from something deeper than awkward dinner questions. That part unsettled her. On Friday night, her mother called 3 times in a row. Chloe stared at the screen before answering. Hi, Mom. Her mother's voice came through warm but tight with expectation. Sweetheart, are you really bringing someone? Your sister says you've never mentioned him before. Chloe forced a laugh. We've been keeping it low-key. She glanced at her phone, at Ryan's name sitting in her recent messages. Low-key was an understatement. What does he do? Her mother asked. Chloe paused for half a second too long. He works in education, she said, sticking to the version they'd practiced. Consulting. Something like that. It wasn't technically a lie. It just wasn't a truth she fully understood either. Her mother hummed in approval. That sounds stable. Chloe swallowed. Stable. That word always landed like a comparison. She hung up and sat in silence for a moment, wondering why this fake relationship suddenly felt like it carried real weight. Saturday arrived faster than she was ready for. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a soft gray, and the cold pressed against her apartment windows like it was listening. Chloe stood in front of her closet, holding the only dress she owned that felt remotely festive. Deep red. Simple. Not flashy. She smoothed it down and caught her reflection in the mirror. For a second, doubt flickered across her face. What are you doing? She thought. This could explode in your face. But another voice answered quietly. Or it could change something. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Not early. Not late. Right on time. Chloe's pulse spiked so hard she had to take 2 slow breaths before opening the door. Ryan stood there in dark trousers and a fitted coat, hair brushed back, holding a small bouquet of white flowers. For a second, Chloe forgot every rehearsed line they practiced. He looked different from their cafe meeting. More polished. More intentional. You look incredible, he said simply, eyes taking her in like he meant it. Heat rose to her cheeks before she could stop it. These are for your mom, he added, holding out the flowers. First impressions matter. Something in her chest softened unexpectedly. You didn't have to do that. He smiled slightly. I wanted to. When she stepped outside, she noticed the car parked along the curb. Sleek. Black. Definitely not something she associated with education consulting. She looked at him, eyebrows raised. Family car, he said lightly, catching the question before she asked it. Long story. Chloe hesitated but didn't push. Not yet. The drive felt quieter than she expected. Streetlights reflected off icy patches on the road, and the world outside the windshield looked like a painting washed in silver. Chloe's hands rested in her lap, fingers twisting together nervously. You don't have to be nervous, Ryan said gently. I still on the road. I'm not, she lied automatically. He glanced at her and smiled faintly. Your foot's bouncing. She looked down and forced it still. They just expect a lot, she admitted after a moment. And I'm tired of feeling like I don't measure up. Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You measure up, he said firmly. Not playful. Not teasing. Certain. The conviction in his voice made her chest ache in a way she couldn't explain. She turned toward the window so he wouldn't see her swallow hard. When they pulled into her parents' driveway, the house glowed with warm lights spilling through every window. Voices drifted faintly through the door even before they reached it. Chloe's stomach twisted. "Last chance to bail?" she whispered. Ryan stepped closer beside her, his presence steady and solid. "Not happening," he said quietly. "I've got you." He offered his hand. For a brief second, she hesitated. Then she placed her fingers in his. His grip tightened just enough to feel grounding. The door swung open before she could knock twice, her mother's face lighting up instantly. "Chloe." And then her eyes shifted to Ryan. "Oh." Ryan extended the flowers with effortless charm. "Mrs. Harris, it's so nice to finally meet you." Chloe watched her mother melt in real time. And just like that, the performance began. The warmth of the house hit Chloe first, thick with the smell of roasted food and cinnamon candles, the kind of comfort that usually felt safe, but tonight only made her pulse race faster. Her mother took the flowers from Ryan like they were proof of something important and immediately started fussing over a vase. "You didn't have to bring these," she said, though her smile said she absolutely believed he should have. Ryan answered smoothly, like he had practiced this exact moment. "I wanted to make a good first impression." Chloe stood there for a second watching the interaction unfold and realized with a strange jolt that he wasn't acting nervous at all. He looked completely at ease, like he had walked into this house 100 times before. That thought flickered through her mind and vanished before she could catch it. Her father appeared from the hallway, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel, posture already straightening in quiet assessment. "So," he said, voice calm but carrying that familiar weight of evaluation. "You must be Ryan." Ryan stepped forward and offered his hand without hesitation. "Yes, sir. It's an honor to meet you." The handshake lasted just long enough to feel like a silent test. Chloe knew her father's habits. Firm grip, steady eye contact, a pause that measured confidence. Ryan didn't pull away early, didn't overcompensate, just matched the pressure and held it until her father released first. A subtle shift passed through the older man's expression, almost approval. "Good to meet you," he said. Chloe exhaled slowly without realizing she'd been holding her breath. One obstacle down, 1,000 to go. The living room buzzed with conversation when they stepped inside. Her sister, Natalie, sat perfectly poised on the couch beside her fiancé, both dressed like they were attending a magazine photo shoot instead of a family dinner. Natalie's eyes flicked toward the doorway and widened slightly when she saw Ryan. Surprise, calculation, and curiosity moved across her face in quick succession. "Chloe," she said, standing smoothly. "You didn't tell us you were bringing someone." Chloe opened her mouth, but Ryan spoke first, his tone warm and easy. "I'm Ryan. It's nice to finally meet everyone. Chloe's told me a lot about you." It was a perfect answer. Polite, inclusive, impossible to challenge without sounding rude. Natalie blinked once, recalibrating, then extended her hand. "Well," she said slowly, "it's nice to meet you too." Her fiancé followed with a polite nod, but Chloe caught the subtle glance he gave Ryan's coat, his watch, the car keys briefly visible in his hand. Noted, assessed, filed away. Dinner unfolded in waves of conversation and small, sharp tests disguised as curiosity. Questions about work, about how they met, about how long they'd been together. Each time, Ryan answered with just enough detail to sound natural without inviting deeper scrutiny. "We met at a bookstore cafe," he said easily when her aunt leaned forward with interest. "She recommended a novel I ended up loving. I figured I should keep her around." Laughter circled the table, light and approving. Chloe played her part, rolling her eyes and nudging his arm gently like they'd done this 100 times. Under the table, his hand found hers briefly, a grounding squeeze that steadied her nerves. He complimented her mother's cooking without overdoing it, listened attentively to her father's stories, even laughed at her uncle's terrible jokes with convincing sincerity. Watching him move through the room was like watching someone navigate familiar terrain. Too familiar. Halfway through dinner, her grandmother leaned forward, eyes sharp despite her gentle smile. "You know," she said, studying Ryan carefully. "You look familiar." The table quieted just enough for Chloe's heartbeat to become loud in her own ears. Ryan didn't flinch. "I get that sometimes," he said lightly. "Apparently, I have one of those faces." Her grandmother continued to look at him for a moment longer than comfortable, then nodded slowly and returned to her meal. The conversation resumed, but something had shifted. Chloe felt it like a draft across the back of her neck. She glanced at Ryan, trying to read him. His expression remained calm, relaxed, but for a split second their eyes met, and she saw something there. Not fear. Not exactly. More like anticipation. As if he'd been waiting for that moment, and it had finally arrived. The rest of dinner moved forward, but the air had changed in a way Chloe couldn't quite name. Conversations continued, plates were passed, glasses refilled, laughter rose and fell in familiar patterns. Yet beneath it all she felt a quiet tension threading through the evening. Ryan handled every question with calm confidence, never over-explaining, never stumbling. When her father asked about work again, he gave a thoughtful but simple answer about consulting and educational projects. When her aunt tried to pry into future plans, he deflected with humor and turned the focus back to Chloe, praising her work ethic in a way that made the table shift subtly in her favor. Each time he did that, Chloe felt something inside her chest loosen. He wasn't just pretending to date her. He was protecting her, gently, without making it obvious. At one point, while everyone else debated holiday travel plans, Chloe excused herself to the kitchen under the pretense of helping her mother. She needed a moment to breathe. The kitchen lights felt too bright after the warm dimness of the dining room, and she leaned lightly against the counter, steadying herself. Her mother followed a few seconds later, drying her hands on a towel. "He's wonderful," she whispered immediately, eyes shining with relief and something softer. "Chloe, sweetheart, he's kind. He listens. He looks at you like you matter." The words hit harder than Chloe expected. She swallowed quickly. "Mom, it's still new," she said carefully. Her mother studied her face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes you can tell when someone is real." Chloe didn't answer. She wasn't sure what real meant anymore. When she returned to the living room, Ryan was standing near the fireplace, speaking quietly with her father. For a split second, the sight made her stop in the doorway. Her father rarely looked relaxed with new people, yet now he nodded along with something Ryan was saying, even smiling faintly. Ryan noticed her first and met her gaze across the room. Something softened in his expression, like he'd been looking for her. That small moment of connection sent a strange warmth through her chest, unexpected and steady. She crossed back to his side, and he shifted slightly, creating space for her without breaking the conversation. It was such a natural movement that if she hadn't been paying attention, she might not have noticed. But she did, and it felt comfortable. Too comfortable for something that was supposed to be temporary. Later, as the evening wound down and people drifted toward dessert and coffee, Chloe found herself actually laughing. Not the polite, careful laughter she used during family gatherings, but real laughter that loosened something inside her. Ryan sat beside her on the couch while her uncle told an exaggerated story from years ago, and at one point Ryan leaned closer to murmur a quiet comment that made her bite her lip to keep from laughing too loudly. It felt easy, effortless. For a few minutes, she forgot entirely that this was an arrangement. Then her sister's voice cut gently through the moment. "You two seem very comfortable," Natalie said, watching them with a thoughtful expression. Chloe's smile froze slightly. Ryan answered before the silence could stretch. "We are," he said simply. No hesitation, no embellishment, just quiet certainty. Natalie held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded once and turned back to her fiancé. But Chloe caught the look. Curious, calculating, suspicious. By the time they finally stepped outside, the night air felt sharper, colder, like reality returning after a temporary escape. Chloe exhaled slowly as they walked toward the car, her heels crunching lightly over thin ice. "You were incredible in there," she said once they reached the sidewalk. Ryan glanced at her, amused. "So were you." She shook her head. "No, really. You handled everything. My family. They can be a lot." He opened the car door for her and waited until she was seated before walking around to the driver's side. When he slid into the seat and started the engine, the interior filled with a quiet warmth. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Chloe turned slightly toward him. "Ryan," she said softly, "have we ever met before?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. His hands still briefly on the steering wheel. Just for a second. Then he looked at her and smiled, calm and unreadable. "Why would you ask that?" he replied gently. Chloe hesitated. "Because sometimes," she admitted, "it feels like you already know me." Ryan held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then he looked back at the road. Maybe, he said quietly. I just pay attention. The drive back felt different from the one before dinner. Quieter. Heavier. Chloe watched the reflections of streetlights slide across the windshield while Ryan drove with steady focus, but her mind refused to settle. The question she'd asked still lingered in the air between them. Have we ever met before? He hadn't answered. Not really. You didn't say no, she said finally, her voice softer than she intended. Ryan exhaled slowly through his nose, the faintest smile touching his lips. I didn't say yes either. She turned toward him fully now. That's not comforting. He stopped at a red light, the car idling gently, and for the first time that night, he looked almost uncertain. Chloe, he began carefully. What if I told you we crossed paths once? A long time ago, but it didn't matter then. Her heartbeat jumped. What does that mean? The light turned green and he eased forward again, gaze returning to the road. It means, he said quietly, sometimes timing changes everything. They pulled up outside her apartment building, the engine humming low in the cold. Chloe didn't reach for the door immediately. She stared at the dashboard like it might explain something for her. You're not going to elaborate, are you? She asked. Ryan leaned back slightly in his seat, hands loose now, no urgency to move. If I explain it the wrong way, he said carefully, it could ruin something that just started feeling good. That answer unsettled her more than a confession would have. You're saying we knew each other? She pressed. He hesitated. Just a fraction. We met, he said at last. Briefly. Her stomach tightened. When his jaw shifted slightly, like he was weighing the cost of honesty. 5 years ago, he said. The number landed hard. 5 years ago. Chloe's mind scrambled backward, flipping through memories like pages in a book she hadn't opened in years. She had been 22, working 2 jobs, exhausted, barely sleeping, barely noticing anything outside her own survival. Where? She asked, barely above a whisper. Ryan's voice was steady, but softer now. You worked at a small cafe near campus. I came in almost every day for a few months. Cappuccino. Extra foam. Her breath caught. A flicker of something surfaced in her memory. A quiet guy. Dark hair, slightly thinner, glasses maybe. Always reading. Always polite. She remembered someone like that. Someone who once tried to start a conversation and she had answered distractedly while wiping down a table. No, she said slowly, eyes widening. You're not. Ryan turned to face her fully now. The composure he'd held all night cracked just slightly at the edges. My name isn't just Ryan, he said quietly. It's Ryan Oliver Bennett. But back then, I went by Oliver. The memory hit her like cold air in her lungs. Oliver, the shy grad student who had once asked her out in the most awkward, sincere way possible. She had been rushing between shifts that day. Tired. Stressed. Focused on rent and tuition. She remembered smiling apologetically and saying she didn't have time for dating. She remembered not thinking about it again. You stopped coming after that, she said slowly. Ryan nodded once. I figured you weren't interested. And you had every right not to be. Silence settled heavily in the car. Chloe's chest felt tight, not from anger, but from realization. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. At the bench. At dinner. Anytime. Ryan's fingers tightened slightly against his knee. Because I didn't want you to say yes out of guilt, he answered honestly. And I didn't want you to say no because you thought I was still the same guy. Her eyes searched his face. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't smug. He looked almost vulnerable. So this whole thing, she said slowly, was what? A second attempt. Ryan's lips curved faintly, but there was no humor in it. It was a second chance I didn't expect to get. He met her gaze steadily. When I saw you on that bench, frustrated and overwhelmed, I recognized you immediately. You didn't recognize me. And I told myself it didn't matter. But then you said you needed someone. And I thought, maybe this time, I won't let fear make the decision for me. Chloe's pulse pounded in her ears. Anger flickered briefly, not sharp, but complicated. You should have told me, she said. I know, he replied instantly. And if you want to walk away right now, I won't blame you. He didn't reach for her. Didn't try to persuade. Just sat there, waiting. The snow outside the windshield fell softly under the streetlight glow. Chloe looked at him, really looked at him. The posture was different. The confidence was stronger. But the eyes. She remembered those eyes. Kind. Hopeful. You look different, she murmured. He nodded. 5 years changes people. She let out a shaky breath. You should have told me sooner. You're right, he said again. And that simple agreement disarmed her more than any excuse could have. Snow had started falling again by the time Chloe stepped out of the car, soft and quiet like the world was holding its breath with her. She stood on the sidewalk outside her apartment building, keys in hand, heart racing in a way that felt nothing like panic anymore. Ryan stayed in the driver's seat for a moment, watching her like he wasn't sure if this was the end of something or the beginning of something he didn't dare hope for. The street was almost empty, just a few dim windows glowing and the faint crunch of snow under distant footsteps. Chloe turned back toward the car before she could overthink it. She walked to his window and tapped lightly. He rolled it down, confusion flickering across his face. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked softly. Ryan exhaled, the breath visible in the cold air. "I figured you needed space." Chloe studied him for a long second. "I did," she admitted, "but not distance." That small distinction shifted something in his expression instantly. She opened the passenger door again and slid back into the seat, closing it gently behind her. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet felt thick, but not uncomfortable. Just honest. "5 years ago," Chloe said finally, looking straight ahead, "I was barely surviving. I wasn't looking at anyone. I wasn't thinking about anything except paying bills and getting through the week." Ryan stayed still beside her, listening. "So if I hurt you back then," she continued, voice steady but softer now, "it wasn't because you weren't worth noticing. It's because I didn't know how to see anything beyond my own exhaustion." He turned toward her slowly. "You didn't hurt me," he said gently. "You were honest. And honestly, you pushed me to become someone better than I was." She glanced at him then, surprised. "That rejection made you better?" A faint smile touched his lips. "It made me stop waiting for life to happen and start building one." The sincerity in his voice settled deep in her chest. Chloe leaned back against the seat, letting that sink in. Everything about tonight had shifted from performance to something real. Something fragile but undeniable. "You could have told me the truth sooner," she said after a moment. "I know," he replied immediately. "And if that cost me my chance with you, I would have accepted it." She studied his face, searching for any hint of manipulation or calculation. There was none, just quiet hope. "You didn't lose your chance," she said at last. The words hung between them like a spark. Ryan blinked, almost as if he hadn't heard correctly. "I didn't." She shook her head slowly. "You showed up when I needed someone. You stood beside me in that house and made me feel seen. Not judged, not compared, just seen." Her voice softened at the end, and she swallowed before continuing. "That wasn't fake. None of that felt fake." Ryan's shoulders relaxed in a way she hadn't noticed them being tense until now. "It wasn't fake for me either," he admitted quietly. "Not for a second." The world outside stayed silent while they sat there, suspended in a moment that felt bigger than either of them expected. Finally, Chloe reached into her small purse and pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. She held it up between them. Ryan stared at it, then at her. "What's this?" he asked softly. "Your payment," she said, "for being my fake boyfriend." He laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "Chloe, you don't need to dash." She gently placed the bill on the dashboard. "That arrangement is over," she said calmly. "No more pretending. No more contracts." Ryan looked at the bill, then back at her, something warm and disbelieving in his eyes. "Then what are we?" he asked. Chloe met his gaze without hesitation this time. "We start over," she said. "For real. No lies. No acting. Just two people who somehow found each other again." The quiet certainty in her voice made something in his expression soften completely. He didn't rush toward her, didn't try to turn the moment into something dramatic. Instead, he simply reached across the console and took her hand, fingers warm and steady around hers. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "More than anything." Outside, the snow continued to fall in slow, soft spirals under the streetlight glow. Chloe felt something shift inside her, like a door opening that she hadn't realized was closed. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something she had to survive. It felt like something she could step into willingly. She leaned back in her seat, still holding his hand, and smiled to herself. $5 had started this, but what it brought her was something she couldn't have bought at any price. If you enjoyed this winter story and want more emotional stories like this, don't forget to follow Winter Veil and keep the night going with another story.